Well, hi everybody. Father Alex here, host of the Godcast. I hope you're all okay. This is the first Godcast of 2025, and my guest is former Southampton and England international footballer Matt Le Tissier. Looking forward to having a conversation with him. I hope you enjoy the Godcast. If you do, then do check out my YouTube channel. You'll find hundreds of interviews on there now. And also perhaps check out my book, Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar Pre-Story, which is available online and in all good bookshops. But for now, I do hope you enjoy this interview with Matt Le Tissier. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Matt Le Tissier. Matt is very well known, former Southampton legend and England international. Matt, welcome to the Godcast. How are you?
Very good, thanks, mate. You?
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, not so bad. Now, I'm going to start with this question, Matt. I'm a big Burnley fan. So, after Charlie Taylor and Jay Rodriguez, I perhaps consider you the third best player to play for Southampton. How does that sound?
Yeah, I can understand that from a Burnley perspective. But it's going to be an interesting fourth round of the FA Cup then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wondered if you'd seen the draw actually.
Of course, yeah. It was actually, the draw was actually taking place while we were sat in the stands 2-0 up against Swansea. So yeah, we had a good idea that who it was going to be before the game even finished.
It's quite interesting because Jay Rodriguez is probably held in the same esteem in Burnley as you are at Southampton. Did you rate him in his time at Southampton? Did you see much of him?
Yeah, yeah, saw a lot of him, and was very impressed. Actually, I thought he was really unfortunate with the timing of his injury. He just kind of got into the England squad, and he was playing some fantastic football. We had a cracking team back then, and he was a big part of that. And yeah, it was really bad timing on his part that that injury really curtailed him. But he did a cracking job for Southampton and very well liked by the Saints fans.
Yeah, good to hear. And I suppose Southampton are in a similar predicament to Burnley were last year, Matt, aren't they? With the old kind of play it out from the back kind of stuff, the Vincent Company way. What's your if people are listening rather than watching, Matt's got a very wry grin on his face. What's your assessment of all that?
Yes, there's definitely parallels to be drawn there, and I had a wry smile because I actually feel like the fact that Vincent Kompany got the Bayern Munich manager's job on the back of getting relegated with Burnley playing the right way. I actually feel like that's what Russell Martin actually had in the back of his mind when he was so stubborn and wouldn't change the way that we were playing, despite the fact that it was getting us nowhere. And so, yeah, that's why the smile was a little bit wry, and yes, definite comparisons to be drawn.
And what do you make of the replacement? I mean, it seems to me, I mean, I like to think I've got quite a good knowledge of footy, Matt, but managers are coming in who I've really never really heard of. What's your spin on that one?
Yeah, I must admit. I mean, my knowledge is kind of footballers dropped off a little bit the last few years, where I'm not working week in, week out in it, and I must say, it was a name that I had to look up when he was appointed. So yeah, it wasn't somebody that was on my radar.
And they're too far gone, really, aren't they now, Matt? There's no way back from there, is there? They're well adrift, aren't they?
Yeah, sadly they are, and it's I don't think any team has ever survived from this bad a position before. I was in a few relegation scraps myself, but I was never. I don't think I ever came close to having 6 points going into January. So yeah, I don't think there's much hope for them this season.
Yeah, and a more serious question about your status at Southampton, Matt. I mean, I saw a podcast not too long ago where somebody said you were the best who ever played for Southampton, and you went, "Yeah." I don't know if there was if you that's what you actually felt, but it got me thinking about some of the. I mean, there's been some great players, hasn't there? I mean, I was thinking about somebody who's not got a lot of endearment in Burnley is Blackburn ex-Blackburn player Shearer, and then before that, of course, players like Kevin Keegan, Shilts. Peter Shilton, I mean, it's a good list to be in, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's been some cracking players at Southampton over the years. Obviously, there are players who were better than me that have played for Southampton, but I think a lot of people at Southampton are grateful for me not moving on from the club. So I had 16 years playing there, which kind of sways a lot of people when they're talking about, the best players that have played at their football club. Having said that, Alan, when he was at Southampton, if you're just talking about form at Southampton, actually Alan wasn't that great at Southampton. His goals return record was actually pretty poor. And myself and Rodney Wallace, who were playing alongside Alan at the time, we both outscored Alan most of the seasons that we played alongside him. So yeah, it all depends on the criteria that you use for the best player. There was a fan vote back in 2010 on I think it was the 125th anniversary of the football club, and yeah, I got voted as the fans' best player ever, with Mick Shannon in second place actually.
Shannon, yeah, another great player, yeah. When you arrived at Southampton, Matt, were you kind of seen as this next great thing, like Rooney was at Everton? Did it take a while? Just for people who don't know, just share a bit of that if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't. I didn't get the hype that the players do in this day and age. You've got to bear in mind this is 1986 when I came through the Southampton. I did my apprenticeship on the YTS scheme as it was back then on 26. I think I was on 30. I think it was on 32 or 35 pound a week when I made my debut in the first division as it was back then. So I did that before I turned professional. So yeah, but there was not really, I scored the first season I broke into the first team. I scored 10 goals that season, including a hat trick in a first division game. But yeah, there wasn't the media attention paid to some skinny little kid at Southampton who scored a few goals, and it took a little while for me actually to make my spot in the team permanent. I was probably in and out the team for the next 2 or 3 seasons, and it was only really in the 89-90 season that I had my major breakthrough. We sold Danny Wallace, who was a cracking player, and he went to Man United, and that opened up a spot in the team. And I was fortunate I was in the right place at the right time, and I took my chance when it came, and I ended up scoring 24 goals that season and won the PFA Young Player of the Year. And kind of that was the breakthrough season. That was the time when I kind of started getting a bit more publicity. But it was still another 4 years, 3 or 4 years, I think, before I actually made my England debut.
Yeah. And one of my favourite away grounds, Matt, is Goodison Park. Just love the smell, the atmosphere. I mean, and I never went to the Dell, but it looked like one of those places as well. Was it a really special place to play?
It was an amazing place to play. Yeah, I absolutely loved it down there. The crowd were right on top of the pitch, and when I mean right on top, I mean like 2.5 yards from the touchline to the first row of seats.
Mm.
It was proper intimate setting, and not many opposition players liked coming and play down there. It was a pretty good fortress for us, and it was one of the reasons I think why we stayed in the Premier League for all those years during the 90s, because our home record kind of got us through in the end, and the crowd down at the Dell were right behind us. And when the crowd are that close to the pitch, it can be a bit intimidating for opposition players.
Yeah, and all fans have favourite players. My favourite players, Glenn Hoddle, who I want to ask you about in a minute. But who was your favourite players when you were a kid?
Glenn Hoddle. Glenn Hoddle was my hero as a kid. I was a Spurs fan growing up, and I was probably a Spurs fan because Glenn Hoddle played for him.
Mm.
He had that much of an influence on me as a kid. Liam Brady was another player who I admired greatly. Even though I was a Spurs fan and he was playing for Arsenal, I could still appreciate, a great footballer when I saw one. So they were kind of the two that really stood out for me as a kid, who I liked to try to emulate. In fact, I spent I think about 3 games when I was about 14 or 15. Because my left foot wasn't very good, and I challenged myself to play 3 football matches in a row where I didn't touch the ball with my right foot, and I managed to do that, and it made a heck of a difference. And my left foot got pretty good pretty quickly, and I wanted a left foot like Liam Brady's and a right foot like Glenn Hoddle's.
Like Glenn was just I grew up as a Spurs fan because my family was from London, and I remember the cup finals of 80, 81, and then the UEFA Cup. But I sometimes think, and I was looking. I was surprised how few England caps you'd won, Matt, when I looked. I thought, crack, if I'd have guessed, I'd have probably said 30 or 40. Um, but people like you and Glenn Hoddle are perhaps described as luxury players, aren't they, Matt? And I wonder why you think they're described as luxury players and not players of necessity because what's going on there?
I think English football had a real problem during the 70s and 80s, probably into the 90s even, with players who were a little bit different. With players who could do um, probably more than the other players could, but perhaps whose work rate wasn't as high as the lesser talented players. And I think a lot of England managers and English managers kind of look down their noses at players like that. And I think there was a bit of jealousy involved in it, quite frankly. And yeah, it's taken a long time, I think, for England managers to appreciate real natural talent.
If you were playing now, Matt, do you think you'd be an England regular? Just it might be a very pretentious question to ask, but based on what you see and what you had as a player.
I think if you had an Englishman now playing in the Premier League, an English midfielder playing in the Premier League, who was regularly getting 20 goals a season, I think he'd probably be the first name on any England team sheet right now. So yeah, from that point of view, I would think in this day and age with the goals output that I had, I would probably be a lot higher up the pecking order than I was back in the 90s. But you got to remember also in the 90s, there was a lot of good English forwards scoring a lot of goals back in the 90s. So the competition was a lot hotter, I think, back in the 90s.
Yeah. Did you ever play with Glenn in the England team, Matt? Or
No. No,
no?
I didn't, unfortunately. No, I didn't make my debut till 1990. I want to say 94, I think it was,
Right. Yeah.
when we didn't qualify for the World Cup in '94, and Graham Taylor got sacked. Terry Venables was put in charge. I think it was March '94 when I made my debut, and Glenn sadly had already played his last game for
Yeah.
England one year.
I don't know if fans like these little tidbit kind of questions. Who was the best player to play alongside you then?
Well, I played alongside Gazza briefly for England, and he was probably the best Englishman of my generation. So I would say Gazza would be right up there as one of the most talented players that I played alongside.
He finished his career at Burnley pretty much. But his knees were well gone by the time he got to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great talking about football. And who do you think are the outstanding players now, Matt? Just with again the flair players. Who do you like watching? Who takes your eye?
Um, yeah, I think there's some good players over the last few years. Kevin De Bruyne is somebody who I've really enjoyed watching. Sadly, I think he's suffered a little bit with injuries the last couple of seasons and isn't quite the player he used to be. But I've loved people like David Silva at Manchester City, Bernardo Silva's, Phil Foden, those kind of players. Jude Bellingham, I think is going to be a wonderful footballer. Already is. So yeah, there's plenty of talent. I enjoyed Jack Grealish when he was at Aston Villa. I thought he was a little bit different and not quite been the same since he went to Man City. I know he's won plenty of honours with them, but I think his individual performances, I think, were probably better at Aston Villa than they were at Man City.
Yeah. Great. I know people enjoy those. Listen to what you've got to say about footy there. But now let's move on to the recent times, Matt. And I know that the stuff around Sky is well documented. So and that seems to be on lots of podcasts. Did you rather than go through all that stuff, did you see that on the horizon though? Was the waters stormy before that point?
Um, it kind of wasn't really until COVID hit. It wasn't. It didn't seem to be any problems at that point, and then it all kind of started unraveling when I decided to have an opinion on social media that went against the mainstream narrative, and yeah, I think after that it all kind of went downhill very quickly from there.
Did that surprise you how controversial it all became? I mean, I went from this is Matt Le Tissier, great football pundit, and then I mean, I'll tell you this, Matt. I mean, I put on my social media that I was interviewing you, and somebody said, why are you going to interview uh, that far right extremist?" And I was, I can see you laughing. I was going to say, when somebody says that, what's your? I mean, you're laughing, but surely there must be a serious consideration to that as well.
I don't really take that stuff very seriously at all, to be honest. That's a label that was given to me by the mainstream media, who obviously that's what they do to try to paint you as a bad person because I was going against what they were trying to achieve. I think the propaganda that was going on during the COVID years was disgusting from the mainstream media. I called it out, and their way of retaliating against me is to stick all these labels on me. And unfortunately, there is a percentage of the population that still believe everything that the mainstream media says. If anybody wants to sit down with me and have a conversation for a couple of hours, and at the end of that couple of hours, they want to come to the conclusion that I'm some far right extremist, I'd be incredibly surprised. So unless you've actually sat down and had a conversation with me, and don't just take the word of what's in the media, until you've had a conversation with me, don't judge me.
Yeah. And of course the COVID was the beginning of the controversy, but then it gives you a platform in a completely different genre to football, doesn't it? It gives you people then ask you what you think about other things, whether it's about illegal immigrants or whatever it is. Did you feel comfortable moving into that kind of territory? Were you happy to voice an opinion?
Yeah, I don't mind having an opinion on things. I think we're all entitled to an opinion. Um, uh, I think there's a lot of stuff that's gone on in the world over the last few years that I've kind of disagreed with, and I've been pretty vocal in saying that. It's been quite interesting seeing the difference in the reaction of people on social media, and how different it is to people in real life when you have conversations with actual humans.
Yeah.
Because the online world is a very different world to what is actually going on in the real world, in my opinion.
What do you think it is about society, Matt, that has led us? I mean, I'm a priest. People can say I've got my dog collar on. The world does seem quite harsh. People and I've read what you've said about free speech, and I'm absolutely an advocate of free speech. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and I would always fight for people's right to do that. But it has become very quite harsh, hasn't it? People, by the example I've given you, have been quite harsh to you in their opinion of you. What do you think's going on in society that's got us to this kind of place where,
I think a lot of people have been psychologically manipulated by politicians, by the mainstream media, by the behavioural nudge units that we used during COVID. And I think there is so much information that these people have to enable them to manipulate people's opinions. And most people aren't aware that these people exist, that these units exist within the British Army, and they were weaponised against the British people, quite frankly. And a lot of people don't even realise that to this day, and still carry on and still believe what they're fed in the media. And I'm sorry, I'm not prepared. I had plenty of time on my hands in 2020 to look into things, and I didn't really like what I saw, and I wasn't going to stand by and just say nothing and let it all happen without people knowing about it.
forgive my ignorance, Matt, but did you get the jab?
No.
Were you clear you weren't going to get that
Oh,
from
100%. Yeah, there
yeah.
was there was not a single chance that I was going to be taking that jab. No, I was. Well, firstly, there were several reasons, really. Firstly, I knew how long it takes to test new vaccines. And there was, if what we're told is true, that there was a pandemic started in 2019, 2020, and within 12 months there was a vaccine coming out, or not just one, but four vaccines, and some from companies that have never made a successful vaccine in their lives. That firstly made me very suspicious. So there was no long term, they had no long term safety data at all. impossible for that to happen. And I understood from what the research that I'd done that there was something a little bit more behind this than what we were being told. And if you've not looked up and seen what Agenda 2030 is all about, or Agenda 21, when it comes to things that are going on in the world with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum, all these kind of organisations. If you haven't seen what plans that they've got in store for us humans, then it's about time you probably did take a look, because it's going to come around pretty quick.
And where does that leave us now then in 2025? What's your assessment of what you're seeing before your eyes?
What am I seeing before my eyes? I'm seeing many politicians being installed around the world who are there to implement these plans for the World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030. There's a guy called Klaus Schwab who has openly been bragging about infiltrating the cabinets of the Western world and having their policies implemented by these people. And quite frankly, I think these people who have gone through that system are traitors to their country, and we need to get them out.
And does that apply to the British government?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And not just this isn't a blue and red thing. They're both looking to achieve the same goal, and it doesn't matter whether you're Labour or Conservative. Matters not a jot. They're both implementing the same thing, just maybe at a slightly different pace.
And what is it they're implementing?
Well, that's what you have to go and look at. You have to go and see what Agenda 2030 is all about. It's all to do with the net zero nonsense, the whole climate change fiasco. It's basically anything that is going to enable government to have more control over the lives of their subjects.
Yeah. Matt, it's fascinating. I've got so many questions. It's like, which one do I ask now? So, I noticed on your X feed that next to your name is a crucifix, which leads me to suggest you're a man of faith. To what extent does this play into your thinking and response to what you feel you're seeing?
Yes, I am a man of faith. I became a Christian back in 2023. And I think what pushed me towards, one of the things that pushed me towards that was actually the realization over the last few years that there is a battle between good and evil going on this planet. There really is, and I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And I want to be on the right side. I want to be on the good side. I'm not an evil person. I'm a good person. And the second part, in fact, this actually ties in quite well with where you're from, because my youth team manager at Southampton was a guy called Dave Merrington, former Burnley player, and Burnley born and bred. And he has been a Christian from the age of about 19, I think he said. And he's always played a big part in my life. He was the biggest influence on my football career. We've stayed in touch all these years. And unfortunately, back in 2023, his wife passed away. And I was invited to her funeral, which I went to at the Testwood Baptist Church, about 20 minutes away from me. And I walked into that church that day, and I had the most amazing feeling when I walked into that place, and I just kind of looked around, and I felt this warmth with the people that were there, and I just had this feeling that I belong here. This is where I need to be. I need to be here, and so I've then became a Christian, and I've been going to church pretty much every Sunday ever since. Sometimes with Dave, sometimes not. And yeah, I have regular every 2 or 3 weeks. I sit down with our pastor at the church, and we talk a little bit like this. Actually, we talk all things football. Firstly, because he's a big Saints fan, And then then we talk about the Bible and the Lord, and we have some great chats, and I'm learning lots of things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I a few weeks ago I was a guest on GB News, and again I got a few pelters. Somebody said you go on there and I'll unfriend you. I'm pleased to say they didn't, but but you've been a regular feature on there, Matt. I suppose. For me, I did give it some consideration because I don't know whether again it's perception of reality, but I suppose GB News is seen as a place of the extremes, if that's the right word, or of the radical. What's your view? You know, I mean, because uh, I might have a different theology to you. You know, I'm very much part of an inclusive church, supportive of same-sex relationships, and I'm not particularly wanting to get into a theological debate, but I think my point is that we can all flourish, can't we? And we should all be given an opportunity to say what we think, and the realization that we don't always agree with somebody else.
I think that's one of the biggest things over the last few years is that it's almost you've had families falling out over things when they really shouldn't be. You should be able to have a different opinion with somebody, debate it with them, and then at the end, if you disagree, we'll go, okay, well, we'll agree to disagree on that one, and we'll move on. You don't need to fall out over it. I don't think that's what this world is about. I think tolerance is a big thing. We should be tolerant of each other's views, and it's interesting. I've actually stopped going on GB News after they cancelled a couple of my friends who were presenters on there who got kicked off. So I actually am not a huge fan of GB News anymore, quite frankly, because um, they position themselves as the channel of the people, and yet here they were cancelling people for their opinions. So the cancel culture is embedded quite heavily still in GB News. It's interesting that people think it's a far right extremist, yet GB News are still cancelling their own presenters for having opinions on things. So they all come under the umbrella of Ofcom, who they're incredibly scared of, and Ofcom are a disgusting organisation who are there as gatekeepers for the government. Unfortunately, they're not regulators in any way, shape, or form. They're there to make sure people don't go off piste and talk about things they're not meant to.
Yeah, and I'm guessing one of those people is Father Calvin, who is he's been a guest on the Godcast. So if anybody wants to go and check out Father Calvin and I have a discussion again, we're probably from different places, but I pride myself on chatting to anybody. What stops you going into politics then, Matt? You know, you're a high profile figure. You've got a huge following on social media. You're an opinionated man. Is that an area you've considered?
Not really. No, I've had that question a few times. Quite frankly, the system would have to change if I was to get involved in it. I think the way it sits at the moment, I don't think it's a very good system that we have here. I think it's um, far too far too weighted in favour of the two big parties. And quite frankly, I think for our civilization now, we've moved on a little bit, and I think it's way too antiquated. And I think we need to implement some kind of direct democracy, quite frankly, in this country where the people get the final say on big issues that surround this country, because the governments are just not listening to the people at the moment. We saw 72%, I think it was, of people wanted an investigation into the grooming gangs, and yet the Labour government were threatened with having the whip taken away from them if they voted for that. So it's pretty disgusting. I think the system at the moment where the prime minister gets to whip his party into line and not have not take their constituents' complaints into account. I think it's a pretty poor system that we've got, and I think it needs to change. And I'll only get involved in it if it would change.
And where does your so, so would you be encouraging of the Reform Party? Do you think they're a good thing for the political environment? Do you see Nigel Farage as a potentially good prime minister?
Do you know what? I've met Nigel a few times. Very personable. Liked him as a bloke. Um, but whenever his name crops up, I have a real problem with something that he did back in 2021 when on social media he suggested to everybody that Tony Blair should be involved, should be in charge of the vaccine rollout. And at that point, I was like, wow. How, why? I just do not get that he would be endorsing somebody like Tony Blair, who, let's be honest, is a war criminal, and has been knighted for being a war criminal. There you go. For Nigel Farage to come out and say that about Tony Blair, who's very much in favour of, national IDs. He's very much wants everybody, to be able to tracked, to have everything that they have tracked. That's why he's a big advocate of the central bank digital currencies. And so when Nigel came out with that put a massive big question mark for me against Nigel.
Yeah, but yeah, I see. I have this thing as a Christian. A lot of people ask me, or maybe pigeonhole me because of the environment. I work in an estate context, Matt. Very challenging. A lot of issues around poverty. And one of the reasons I find it very difficult to align myself with any political parties because I don't believe the Christian voice is being heard. So I mean, obviously you said you've been going for a few years now. How do we go about that? If we can't find a political party, then what do we do? And for me, so, I mean, I've got a very small presence compared to yours, but it's a way for me to maybe speak of Christianity into the political arena. I've numerous high-flying politicians on, but what's your perspective? How do we try and speak into this from a Christian context?
Mm.
Bearing in mind, I will bear that some of Calvin's views, I'm not familiar with yours, are radically different to mine. So how do we try and bring the message of love and respect and tolerance for one another into the public arena if we don't put ourselves forward for Parliament and other things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't think that Parliament is the way through that. Although I have to say I've been quite encouraged in America because I think Donald Trump has actually mentioned quite a few times about Christians and Christianity and Jesus, and that's kind of put it into the arena a little bit. I would prefer, obviously, if the politicians here, who, if there are any Christians, if they would be more vocal about it, that would be pretty good. But as I said, I think for me, the system has to change to take power away from the MPs a little bit and put the power back into the hands of the people. And I think there's been, from what I'm seeing, there's been a recent surge, especially among the young, with people following Jesus again. So it doesn't need. I don't think it needs political sway, but it would certainly make things happen a bit quicker, probably.
Yeah. Maybe, and just tell me to shut up if you're not happy to talk about this, but I think where we might be different is so, and I'm a Christian who has got concerns about Trump and his politics, and that would be, many of them I go, yeah, I understand that, but I think the way we go about it is difficult. So, for example, somebody said to me recently that they found the niqab on a Muslim lady offensive, and I just said, do you really find it offensive, or are you just saying that because you want to light a torch paper and say something controversial? Um, I'm the kind of guy. I've been around quite a while, and I get stick for being a Christian. I get trolled. It's very difficult to offend me, I think, and so. Just interested to know what you think. It's all right to have a view, but there's a way to have a view, isn't there? And there's a way that doesn't come across as kind of um, igniting something rather than discussing about something. And that's the key problem I have with is Mr. Trump. Is
Yeah, yeah.
he
Oh,
fired?
listen, I'm not saying Trump's perfect. I'm just saying that he's put the name out there, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Listen, no two humans. I say this many times. You put two humans into a room and get them to talk about 100 different subjects. You'll never find two humans who will agree on all 100 subjects. And so there's a lot of things about Donald Trump that a lot of people will find offensive. There was a lot of things personally for me about Joe Biden and his son and the stuff that he did I found offensive. But well, that's all part and parcel. You're never going to get people to agree on everything the whole time, and you have to make life's about making compromises a lot of the time. And sometimes that means choosing the lesser of two evils.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can definitely agree on that, Matt. I think we can definitely agree on that.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting political landscape at the moment, and I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen on the 20th of January when Trump takes charge. And I think there's a lot of people who are fearful of that. There's a lot of people who are hopeful of that. I probably sit somewhere in the middle, and I'm one of those guys who wants to wait and see for people's actions before judging people on their words.
Yeah. For what it's worth, Matt, I think you'd be a fascinating individual on the political landscape because I think people would first and foremost would listen to you and you. I'm sure you speak for a lot of people, and I think you probably speak for a lot of people in the context that I'm working in as well. And I think what you said about free speech is absolutely correct. Another guest I had on the podcast was Alex Phillips. I don't know if you know Alex Phillips. She works for Talk Radio and more of a right leaning uh, outlook on politics, which is fine, and um, I really, I purposely use that word far right at the beginning because I think we are weaponizing that term and I really don't like that because I want to hear people's opinions.
Yeah, well,
I
Keir
want to hear
Starmer used that phrase to label anybody who wanted an investigation into the grooming gangs, up north, and it just it's lost all meaning now. They've completely lost all meaning of that word because you're trying to label people. All it does is it's a means of shutting down conversation. You throw that word about and they go, oh, far right, I'm not going to engage. Basically, what it means is I can't back my argument up, so I'm going to throw a name at you and then not have to speak to you again. And it's the most childish way of dealing with things. And unfortunately, we've got a prime minister who is incredibly childish, incredibly deceitful, nasty human being, in my opinion, from what I've seen about him, completely non-empathetic human. And the sooner he's gone, the better, in my opinion.
Okay, well, thanks for your honesty and your opinions. I think we need to find something we can agree on to finish with. We could both, Burnley and Southampton, well, we couldn't both win the FA Cup because if we're drawn against each other, it can only be one of us. So I think my money would be on the Clarets. Do you think Burnley? I don't know if you've got an eye on the Championship. Think Burnley are going to be there or thereabouts, Matt?
I think they'll be there or thereabouts. Yeah, I think Leeds are pretty strong. It's a pretty decent league. I really enjoyed it actually last season when Southampton were in the Championship. Obviously it was nice to be winning a few more games than we have been this season. But I think Leeds will probably be one of the teams that will get promoted. Obviously, Sheffield United are up there. Sunderland have had a good season. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be pretty tight for the second spot. I think Leeds will fill one of those places. And then I think it's probably, one of those three teams that I mentioned. So Burnley will have a good chance. I think maybe need to score a few more goals. I think it's the only criticism I'd have of what I've seen so far. There's been a lot of 0-0 draws, I think, this season. So probably from a goal scoring perspective, they just need to up their game in that department.
Yeah, yeah. I think the fans are finding it very different to company's style, but it is getting results, and we are.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we've conceded 9 all season, something like that. So
Yeah, it's
we're in
pretty amazing defence you've got there. It really is, and that's what Scott Parker's obviously built the built the season on. And if you're only going to concede 9 goals in the 26 games you've played so far, then you don't really have to score that many. And that's exactly what's happening. So yeah, if he continues that, we've got a great chance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Matt. I mean, where we might be slightly different politically, I can only just tell you, you are such a gifted footballer, and it's a real privilege to be able to talk to bit of footy with you, and yeah,
No
maybe
problem at all. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I had the same opinion of Boris Johnson and of Rishi Sunak and of Theresa May than I have of Keir Starmer.
yeah. Well, we've definitely got that in common then. All right, Matt. Well, thanks very much, and I hope everybody's enjoyed this. Check out the Godcast. There's lots of footballers on there as well, mostly Burnley footballers, but lots of great footballers. So do check it out. And Matt, thanks for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
You're welcome.